All right, so Donald Trump is back at the White House, but what is his re-entry after a 4-year period and becoming the 47th president of the United States mean for bilateral trade and his equation with India? Joining me to discuss that this morning is Mohandas, Chairman, Aarin Capital, and Dr. Srinath, policy researcher and corporate advisor. Mr. Pai, let me begin by asking you this one fundamental question that emerged as part of the inaugural speech of Donald J. Trump yesterday. Can we now safely assume that climate change and all talks around climate change are now history? Because the Paris Climate Agreement is at risk, if not over and obsolete already, and there is absolute clear-cut focus on fossil fuels. What does this mean for climate change, something that has been the toast of town and for policy advisors across the world for the last many years now?
Look, my view is that climate change is happening around the world, and the world is taking steps. Corporations are taking steps, societies are taking steps, countries are taking steps. But the sad thing is, the entire matter has been captured by these climate extremists who are trying to bring about, regulations that are hurting people. Like in the UK, it's hurting people, and people don't have money. It's forcing change at a pace not required. I think we got to temper it down, and that's what Donald Trump is going to do. You cannot do away with fossil fuel altogether. And if you just cut down on fossil fuel exploration, you're going to increase prices to a point when people cannot survive. I think we got to moderate it, and this will possibly moderate what is happening. But the long-term move towards reducing carbonization is going on. I think there's been tremendous progress, and progress is going on. In the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to see greater progress. And in the US, many corporations, almost everybody is working towards that. So I don't think this is going to have a major impact, except for those climate extremists who may not possibly not get the kind of money that they were aspiring for their pet projects. So I'm not worried about that, because I think the secular trend towards reducing carbonization is very, very huge all across the world.
But with the US not respecting, let's say, the Paris Climate Agreement, is there going to be more pressure on developing economies like
No,
India to cut their carbon emissions?
I don't think so, because the US government has very little to do, in my view, because it's all private corporations, right? Private corporations are doing it, and their technology is coming on, the EV revolution is on, and natural gas is there in a huge way, which will reduce carbon emission substantially. So I think all the things are working very right. What President Trump possibly does not want to be held hostage by a few set of NGOs who try to determine the future by pushing pressure on people through the media and otherwise. So I think it's time for things to be cooled down a little bit, to evaluate and to go on. I'm not so worried on this score.
Okay, you're not worried. Srinath, let me bring you into this discussion. Drill, baby, drill. We heard that again from POTUS, Donald J. Trump yesterday, and he's saying that the new Green Pact is going to go. The EV target of 2030, 50% of US fleet to be EV by 2050 is out of the window, and the focus on fossil fuel is going to be back. What does this mean for US wanting to export its own petroleum and natural gas to countries like India and India's trade surplus with the US?
So, Kartik, I think the green is caught between the red and the blue in the US. I think that's very, very clear. Two, I don't think India needs to worry about anything around sustainability or climate change, because we have had made far better progress than almost any part of the world, be it renewable energy as a large proportion of our total energy consumption. But US very clearly is moving back to what I call the old lobbies. I mean, the only thing that I have not heard in the last couple of months of the campaigning is the gun lobby coming up. Otherwise, you've heard about tariffs on pharma, the drug lobby, the tech lobby, the entire now the narrative around oil. The conventional US lobbying has been all around these big bucks industry. And I think what it is also going to try and do is, if you remember last year, there were very frenzied conversations around the so-called US Saudi Arabia pact of buying oil. Then we all realized that there was not a pact at all. I think very clear Saudi and US are moving far more closer. I think the oil is here to stay. And I think let's also do a step back. I think a lot of poll promises that President Trump has made, I think we should wait and watch for the next 100 days to figure out how many of them are actually enforceable. Because half an hour after his swearing in, the very first legal suit has been filed against the entire new idea of Dodge, right?
Right.
So I don't know how many of them will stand. Legal scrutiny is idea of not giving citizenship by birth will hit the legal wall in the US, and a lot of these we'll have to wait and watch. But again, very clearly, I think India is far more stratified. We have one leg with Russia, the other leg with the US. I think we are good to go for time being.
Okay. Mr. Mohandas Pai, let me bring you in very clearly. I think the message that did come, and this is something I asked Srinath also in my previous question, but I think a very clear message was that with fossil fuels, the new Green Deal and the EV target by 2030, 50% of US cars to run on electric seems to be an agenda that Donald Trump does not want to continue with. Is this being done because Donald Trump wants to promote fossil fuels and the natural resources available within US, or is it a bid to thwart the lithium-ion batteries that come from China?
No, I think what he wants to do is to make sure that he uses his natural resources to reduce the deficit. There's a $2 trillion deficit. China had a $1 trillion trade surplus. China is a mercantilist economy which exports at all costs, subsidies from the government. I think there's a problem globally with China's economic management, and the world has to react. And he has to react because he's the largest contributor to China's surpluses. And I think what he's doing is he's making sure there'll be enough oil for the US to become a major exporter, which it was growing up. And the US will not have to import in future. And he's going to use that money and the revenues to reduce the deficit in whatever way he can to balance the economy, which is very important. I mean, we can't have the US pumping, borrowing $2 trillion a year all across and running up huge deficits, which we know that they will not be able to pay back. There has to be a rebalanced economy. And to an extent, what he's doing is, I think, very clear.
All right. Srinath, Sridharan, let's shift focus now to something that was pretty much a scare and a sense of worry, but Donald Trump did not emphasize too much on it in his inaugural speech yesterday, and that is tariffs. While he did mention that tariffs are going to be on his agenda, he did not repeat the numbers that he had used in his election campaign of 60% tariff on China, 25% on Canada and Mexico, and 20% for the rest of the world. Now, India's effective tariff rate with the US stands at about 3%, but India charges higher tariff for shipments coming from US into India. Now, is retaliatory tariffs a real threat which in the next few weeks could unfold and could hamper India's relationship with US?
The answer is yes, Kartik. It really is a real threat. Tariffs, I think I would probably broad base it as, if you look at the entire narrative around deregulation that the entire West Coast lobby has been pushing the Trump regime for, is I think what is going to happen is tariff tech, the big tech players wanting far greater access globally. I don't know if you've read the AI regime, the new regime that the framework that they released last Monday. President Biden's administration released it. It actually buckets India and China as the third tier country, which would need case-to-case approval even to buy chipsets, GPU chipsets from the US. So I think the nature of using trade for probably far greater access to the market is something that the President Trump in his businessman capacity would do. And I'm being a little sarcastic here. The very fact that very few presidents or heads of state have actually personally profited in the week that they're going to take charge, as we saw the entire crypto coin issue. Yeah. I think this is the nature. He's going to use everything possible of what is good for probably the US, and I'm saying probably the US and for himself as well. And I think there India has to navigate very, very clearly. We have spoken about Web3 and AI as if we are ready. We are not ready. I think our entire STEM ecosystem is still way behind the curve. If we want to be any meaningful AI player in the world, that's one. Two, if you want to do anything in the Web3, there's a lot more Indian government policies that will have to encourage. And the nature of the beast in this is, if you have to buy the hardware from the US, how do we actually break the barrier? Are we going to be forced to give in to allow for the US big techs more market access here? And I think that's going to be the real challenge.
Okay, let's bring in Mr. Mohandas Pai now back. You did talk about, Srinath, you did talk about STEM, and I think that is an area of focus. But Mohandas Pai, let's understand, there was, of course, a crackdown on illegal immigration as part of Trump's inaugural address. But there was absolutely no talk of H-1B visas. So visas, is that something that Indian students and those from the IT sector who happen to work in the US need to worry about, in your opinion?
Well, first, Indian students don't have to worry. But I think there needs to be a tightening of criteria for Indian students to go to the US by the United States. If you look at about 325,000 students, I reckon about 100, 125 have gone for genuine education. The rest have gone there to take some small courses and possibly immigrate or stay in the US. And I think that's a matter of concern for everybody because we don't want this to become a route for immigration by different way. Now, as far as H-1B is concerned, one important event that's happened is the Indian software industry's dependence on H-1B has come down. If you look at the latest data, more American companies are using H-1B than Indian service companies. They have brought it down. They've hired more people locally in the United States. And after COVID, when work from home became ubiquitous, it doesn't matter whether you are in the next street or in the next town or in a different part of the world. Everybody has gotten used to work from home, and that means work remotely. And that means the need for visas has come down. And I think India is well placed as far as the rhetoric goes. But remember, the US has greater amount of risk by tightening up H-1B. The US is short of people. India is a force multiplier for American big tech companies. There, very large number of people are working there. Let me give you some data. Out of 6 million people working in software in America, 1 million are Indians.
Okay.
America has 10 million people working for it globally, out of which additional 3 million are in India, because out of the 6 million working in software export, 50-60% is for American companies. Out of 10 million working for American companies globally, 4 million are Indians. And in the free world outside China, 50% of software hiring is happening in India.
Right.
I mean, India is a force multiplier, the provider of high quality human capital. And the US does something like that. All the American companies set up offshore centers here, like the GCs are set up in the last 2 years. Look at the extra. So America will lose out big time. And I think they understand that very well, because there's no country in the world which can support American technologies domination by providing human capital. There's no other country. Let's be very clear. America requires India to take on China. Now, China is constrained because of the Chinese firewall. But if you look at the innovation in AI in China, you look at what Alibaba, Tencent, others are doing, it's unbelievable. The kind of money they're spending on technology, on AI is out of the world, much more than the United States. So the only way America can compete with India. So, there could be slight dislocation, slight noise, but I'm not overtly worried, because remember, the tech lobby is very strong, and the tech lobby needs people, high quality people, and they have to compete. So I think it's a win-win. So that is not a worry for me as much as it was in Trump 1.
All right, not as much of a worry as it was in Trump 1, but staying with the subject of human resources, I think, Srinath, there's also another aspect which Trump was fairly vociferous about in his inaugural address, and this was this entire debate of diversity, equity, inclusion. So will DIE out? Will diversity die out under Trump 2.0? In his speech, he said there are going to be only 2 genders that his administration is going to recognize, but he also asked his administration to be colorblind and really make appointments and promotions on the basis of merit. But this entire inclusion and this entire diversity debate, is that something that is pretty much now a chip of the old block? It's not going to come back?
So not really, Kartik. I think he's addressing to a certain demographics, and I think that's a narrative that he's using. The reality is DEI is natural, is equality based, and that's something that everybody has to understand, whether it is in politics or whether it is in corporate world. When we say ESG or governance, I mean, it is about that it is being fair and equal to everybody. So what he is talking about, that the binary of genders, is something that probably is his personal view. It is almost akin to somebody speaking about, let's say, the sensitive topic of abortion and the right to abort, right? So some of these will, I think, figure out and probably play back politically as well. If you were to today say DEI in the Indian ecosystem, because we have 2/3 of the generation less than our population less than 35 years of age, DEI is extremely important and very, very sensitive. And we have realized the backlash that one of the corporate leaders faced 2 weeks ago in India for making a comment about work hours. I think President Trump probably will see a pushback. I think one euphoric wave that he's riding today is new bromance with Elon Musk, which is allowing to make comments on X. And I think give it some more time and let's figure out how that works out.
I think that relationship is a very interesting one, and I think everybody wants to see how long that plays out and how well it plays out. But Mr. Mohandas Pai, let's keep Elon Musk aside right now. I want to come to the overall strategic play when it comes to investments. Now, Donald Trump also mentioned yesterday that he is going to encourage manufacturing in the US, and that is something that again is directly targeted at China. But with more manufacturing coming in the US, is there going to be pressure to rebalance the trade with India as well? And are we likely to see more pressure to buy US clean energy, to buy US defense? And is there going to be more resistance to our pharma and auto exports going to the US?
First let me address the DI issue.
Okay, let's hear you out.
See, DI has been captured by a small set of people who are extremists. Now, you can't have transgenders go to a woman's toilet, participate in women's sports. It's not done. You got to look after women. Women have equal rights too, right? They were being captured. And the rhetoric was going so far to say a baby born in a family should be taken away and put into foster care. That's the only way we can bring in equality. It's totally absurd. It's captured. What is bringing back, I think, is sanity. And it's very important to bring back sanity, not allow society to be captured by a small set of extremists who are trying to push their agenda because they've got access to power. Now, when you talk about
all this extremism, is it not fair to then invest in more infrastructure for the third gender? I mean, at one level, we want to talk about inclusion and we want to talk about, being gender neutral. But at one level, just a toilet debate cannot ignore the third gender.
Nobody is ignoring the third gender. The third gender has equal rights. This is about people who change their gender. They change their gender because of rhetoric, because of what they have said, because of propaganda, etc. And when they change their gender, children under 18 are forced to cut off their body parts, take drugs which hurt them and is irreversible. And these are not done for children. Let's be very clear about that. It's not about the third gender. If you're born a third gender, you have equal rights in all society. Nobody can discriminate. And I don't think discrimination exists in the matter that people talk about, because you have to exaggerate everything to try to create a narrative. Now, when you talk about tariffs, you talk about things, I think India has to open up to the United States. The US is possibly the second largest or the largest trade partner, because we've got a huge trade surplus, trade deficit with China, more than $100 billion. We have a surplus with the United States and a large surplus in services, and we have to open up. But the key is, what is the US going to sell India from the US economy? Because manufacturing has come down. Defense, yes. We have to get defense from the US. They're sophisticated. The Russian technology is very old and no longer acceptable to a country like India. And two, we need to get high technology from the US. So the US is a market leader. And there are other things which we have to do. Yes, we have to reduce some of the tariffs in our business with the US to demonstrate, because we are getting tariff-free access for a large number of what we export. So I think India has to open up. Maybe it will force India to open up. India's problem in trade is not the US, it is China.
Right.
Because the Chinese dump. The Americans don't dump. Americans know what is ROI, profits, etc. They got quarterly results there to give out. They will not dump. So we need Americans. But China is the big enemy for global trade, because they dump, they're mercantilists, they're $1 trillion surplus.
Absolutely.
$1 trillion.
While I understand the China debate, Srinath, last word to you. We are running completely out of time. I want to understand, if US is one country that India enjoys a trade surplus of about $35 billion with, in the overall trade deficit scenario, it's not something, the pressure from US to buy more US produced goods and services, including oil, I don't think that is going to do Indian economy any good, would it?
So not really, Kartik. It's a trade-off, right? It's a zero-sum game. You're not going to buy just because you want to buy. You're going to buy because there is a need, and you will have to balance, I think, the geopolitical volatilities. The reality is, I think India has kind of showed that it is smart at least in the last 3 years. We have seen the Red Sea issue, the Ukraine issue happening, the Israel-Hamas issue happening, and yet we are balanced. And in fact, if I were to call it out, it's a Western hypocrisy, right? You had countries like Germany actually beating the sanctions and buying Russian oil through India. Yes, India did see an opportunity to profit from it, but the reality is, I think India has to navigate this balance.
Right.
And I think prudently, we have also had the regional blocks, right? The Quad and the other things that we have been part of. And I think one thing we missed out, I just want to make a point, is Will President Trump dismantle the multilateral institutions like the UN, because he's been bullying almost every single multilateral
He's pulled out
institution?
of WHO, so that doesn't seem like a very far cry, Srinath. I think that is something that we may see happen in the next few days, if not a few weeks. But gentlemen, with that, we've run completely out of time. But thank you so much for taking time out and joining us on this very important debate early morning today, just a day after Donald Trump took oath as president of the US. With that, it's a wrap right here on Morning Brief at 9.